He had been called a visionary once. His speeches climbed the walls of markets and plazas, and people leaned out of windows to hear him promise a city that could be cleaner, safer, fairer. He walked everywhere without an escort, shaking hands until his wrists ached. Journalists labeled him incorruptible. Vendors called him Alcalde del Pueblo. For a season, he believed it, and perhaps that was his first mistake. The fall was not a stumble, but a trapdoor. Dawn sirens, a knock that rattled the metal gate, cameras already waiting in the street. The banner on the morning news did not say reformer. It said thief. Prosecutors showed charts and signatures he had never seen. Anonymous witnesses spoke from behind a screen. The money trail curved like a river drawn by a trembling hand and ended, conveniently, at his office door. He tried to defend himself, but microphones are hungry for drama, not doubt. Before noon, he was led away in handcuffs that smelled like old rust. Prison is a geometry of humiliation, concrete that sweats. Counting the same 5 steps from bed to bars until the numbers scrape the mind raw. He learned to sleep with a rolled-up shirt under his ear and to speak little. He learned that power, once removed, leaves the skin feeling loose, as if the person underneath might slip out and vanish. Letters from allies stopped arriving. His attorney grew tired of losing motions to a judge who refused to look him in the eye. At night, he replayed the press conference, the headlines, the quick betrayal that moves faster than any truth. In his 3rd month, a guard pushed a cart into the yard and called for volunteers to move books. He raised his hand. The books came from donations, old textbooks, a torn atlas, a few novels swollen by humidity. He stacked them on a plank that served as a shelf and, by accident more than intention, started a tiny library. Men who had never read for pleasure came to touch the pages. They asked him to help write letters to girlfriends, mothers, children who had grown while their fathers disappeared behind bars. He translated feelings into sentences. He found himself again in the grammar of other people's hope. The case crawled on. A contractor admitted under oath that a middleman had fabricated invoices, yet the admission vanished into procedural fog. A witness recanted, then was charged with perjury, then changed his story again. He filed complaint after complaint. Each returned with the same stamp, denied. He celebrated his birthday with a stale bun and a plastic candle. He told himself this was temporary. He repeated it like a prayer until the sentence lost meaning. One afternoon, a nonprofit brought teenagers from the barrios to hear life lessons. They entered the yard in a slow line, trying to look fearless. He recognized the posture. He had once worn it himself when he had nothing but certainty and a microphone. The instructor asked if anyone wanted to speak. The men in the yard snorted or turned away. He stood. He told the kids that power does not cure fear. It only hides it for a while. He spoke of mistakes he had made that were not crimes, of shortcuts he should have refused, of how a city is built from attention, not from slogans. They listened. A boy asked, "And when everything falls?" He said, "Then you start again." 3 winters passed. An accountant from the Treasury finally came forward with a notebook. A ledger that showed the siphoned funds cycling through shell companies, none of them with his name. A judge, new to the case, accepted the evidence. The ruling that freed him was written in the dry grammar of the courts, but to him it read like rain. He left through a door that groaned as if unused. Outside, the sun made him squint. Reporters were there, ready to ask if he would run again. He said no, and meant it for the first time in his life. A friend offered a desk at a foundation that ran programs for youth who had left school. The salary was modest. He accepted without negotiating. His first task was to design a schedule for a community center housed in a former clinic. The building smelled faintly of alcohol and dust. Children traced their fingers over the cracks in the tiles. Mothers waited outside with plastic bags of bread. He created a small classroom with the atlas from the prison shelf's twin. He arrived early to mop floors and stayed late to fix chairs that wobbled like foals. He stopped being a headline and became a presence. The boys called him Prof. A girl who never looked anyone in the eye wrote an essay about her grandmother. He read it aloud and watched her sit taller, as if a weight had slipped from her spine. He called in favors from former opponents, not to buy votes but to borrow soccer balls, a used projector, a box of notebooks. He organized a night class where parents learned to read alongside their children. When a gang began recruiting outside the center, he walked out and asked them to move. They laughed, then moved anyway. He understood that respect can arrive without fanfare. People asked if he missed politics. Sometimes he answered with a joke. In truth, he missed the illusion that big levers can move a city on command. Here, the levers were smaller. A hot lunch, a certification, a repaired faucet that meant a classroom could open. Yet each small lever moved an entire life. He began to keep a private ledger of victories. Camilla passed the exam. Jorge stopped carrying a knife. Mr. Diaz found work at the bakery. Luz said she slept without nightmares for the first time since the raid. One evening, a storm broke over the neighborhood and flooded the center. Water seeped under every door. He and the kids formed a chain to move books to higher shelves. The electricity snapped off. Someone started to cry. He remembered the boy in the prison yard telling him to start again. So he did. The next morning, windows open, fans humming, he welcomed everyone back with cups of cinnamon tea and a promise that the floor would soon be dry. They laughed at the mud prints shaped like countries. The world became map and lesson at once. The old party tried to recruit him for a comeback. They sent an emissary with a practiced smile and a page of talking points. "Your name is clean now," the man said. "We can win with your story." He listened, then looked out the window at the courtyard where two kids were arguing about a penalty kick. The emissary followed his gaze. "You can help more from the mayor's office," he said. "You know that's not true," he replied gently. He walked the envoy to the gate and returned to fix a broken hinge on a classroom door. He kept learning. He learned that forgiveness is a door that opens from the inside first. He learned that the city speaks most honestly in the hour before dawn, when street sweepers make their quiet music and stray dogs rule intersections. He learned to live with the fact that the people who engineered his downfall would likely never face a cell. Some nights the old anger visited him, an animal that paced the room. He let it circle, then watched it tire itself and lie down. In the morning he ran along the river until his breath sounded like the sea. There were ceremonies he could not avoid. A ribbon cutting for the center's new workshop, a graduation where he handed certificates and tried not to cry. A reporter came and asked again if he would return to politics. He considered the children sitting in plastic chairs, their feet not yet reaching the floor, and said, "I already did." The headline the next day missed the point, but the parents understood. They brought empanadas and stories and a broken printer they hoped he could repair. He could not, but a teenager from the tech class could, and that was better. Years later, walking through the market where he had once campaigned, he noticed that the vendors no longer introduced him as the mayor or the ex-convict. They said, "This is the man from the center." Titles had given way to roles, and roles to relationships. A woman stopped him to say that her son, who had been drifting toward the gang, now coached younger kids and was saving for technical school. She squeezed his hand so hard it hurt. "Gracias, alcalde," she said. He started to correct her, then let the word stay. At night, he sometimes rehearsed the speech he would give if the past demanded an answer. It was short. It said, "I am not who I was, and I am not what they said. I am the sum of doors I open for other people." He never delivered it. The work spoke more clearly. The city remained complicated, stubborn, beautiful. So did he. On the anniversary of his release, he returned to the prison with the non-profit that had once brought teenagers to the yard. He carried a box of books and a stack of notebooks bound with string. In the same corner where he had stacked the original library, he helped set up shelves and a sign-out sheet. A young inmate approached, eyes defiant and afraid. The posture he knew so well. "When I get out," the young man asked, "what then?" He answered with the line that had saved him. "Then start again." The boy nodded, as if the sentence were a key that had been waiting in his pocket all along. He wrote to the judge who had signed the final ruling, not to gloat, but to thank her for reading the ledger carefully when others would not. He signed the letter without titles. He signed it the way the kids at the center shouted his name across the courtyard, turned into two quick syllables that felt like a vote of confidence each time they landed. He still felt the scar where public trust had been cut open and exposed. He carried that mark, not as a grievance, but as a reminder that institutions are made of people who can forget to look up from their papers. When donors praised his resilience, he redirected the compliment toward the mothers who kept showing up, toward the teenagers who learned to apologize and try again, toward the janitor who opened the building each morning at 6. Redemption, he had learned, works best when it is plural. There were days when the center felt like a boat patched with mismatched boards. The roof leaked in new places. A shipment of supplies arrived late. A rumor spread on social media that the program was a front for a political campaign. He gathered parents and students in the courtyard and told them the truth, that the only campaign here was for each other. They nodded. The rumor withered. In the evenings, the courtyard filled with the bounce of a ball and the clatter of chess pieces. He watched a boy teach his little sister to read the word puerta. She sounded it out, slow and careful. Door. He stood in the shade and let the words settle on him. A door. Something that opens. Something that closes. Something that protects and invites at once. He had been a man of doors all his life. It took losing everything to learn how to hold one open long enough for someone else to walk through. He did not plan a legacy. He planned tomorrow's schedule. Which tutor could cover mathematics? Which volunteer could drive the van? Whether the carpentry workshop needed new blades. The work was humble and exact, like sweeping a floor you intend to walk on barefoot. When he locked the gate at night, the streetlights cast a grid on the pavement, a soft geometry that made the world look briefly organized and kind. People still called him alcalde, and maybe they always would. He did not correct them anymore. He had discovered a meaning of the word that could not be printed on a ballot. To lead was to listen, to step aside, to choose the small lever that moves a single life. He carried that quiet office everywhere, a second chance worn like a simple ring, plain, durable, and impossible to counterfeit. He walked home beneath a sky rinsed clean by night rain, carrying nothing but keys and the names of his students. At the gate, he paused and breathed, steady and unhurried, and understood at last that this was enough. To return, to open, to stay, to keep the door for others. Begin again.